So thank you all for coming and being a part of episode 3 for the Future of Work series. We've had some really great discussions these past 2 episodes, so I'm excited to continue the discussion with the topic that we have today. My name is Germany Horton. I am from Durham, North Carolina. I currently work at UNC. I am the Communication and Program Specialist in the Office of the Dean of Students. So if everyone else could go around and introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with our first question.
Okay, I'm LaShanya Thompson, and my current role is Director of College Initiatives in the College of Arts and Sciences at UNC at Chapel Hill. I've been with the university for about 13 years. My background is in human resources until I made a shift into this current role that focuses on cross-functional strategic initiatives out of the Office of the Dean.
Oh, yeah. So thanks again for having me. My name is Aaron Epps, and I'm currently in recruiting at Microsoft.
Hey everyone, I'm Sheena Jacobs. I am currently a virtual sales account manager at Cisco, and I recently transitioned from UNC working in career services.
Hey everyone, my name is Raven Evans. I work currently as the lead staffing specialist for University Temporary Services at UNC Chapel Hill. So we're actually a partnership with NC State University. So I work primarily on UNC's campus, but also with NC State. So I handle mainly the temporary staffing, but we have our hands in a little bit of the permanent side as well and some of the other HR facets.
I'm Patricia Brooker, and I am the Chief Operations Officer and Vice President at a behavioral health agency in Philadelphia, the Consortium. I also work with RTriad as the Director for Talent Management. My background and my first love is in human resources. So I right now am, their lead HR person for RTriad, and happy to join the conversation.
All right, so our first question, feel free to answer the question, jump in, have a comment about someone's comment to the question. But our first question is, for many, there has been a drastic shift as it relates to where and how people are working today. So in your opinion, will social capital have more of an impact than skills and experience as it relates to being competitive for opportunities? That was kind of a mouthful, so if I need to repeat it, I can.
I wouldn't say that social capital will be more important. I think that it's always important, but I do think what will be important given the current situation is the ability to translate things like emotional intelligence and cultural competence to the virtual space. So much of being able to be effective in those spaces have to do with nonverbal cues and things like that don't always come to bear when you're working in the virtual space. So I think the ability to navigate that probably more so, I think those are core skills, and there'll be other core technical skills that are equally important. So I wouldn't say, in my opinion, that social capital will be more important, but will just play an underlying role in folks' ability to be successful.
I am truly hoping that it will come increasingly more important, just because with recruitment and things like that, we're always pushing for that potential to hire or potential for hire. So those potential candidates are really, really huge. And especially right now, while we have the COVID pandemic, and we're just in a situation where we have so many college grads and so many people who have these kind of intangible skills that are really going to be an asset later down the line for our workforce. So I'm really hoping that that's something that will become more of something that's going to be in our organization's at the forefront of their mind, to make sure that we are getting those potential candidates and making sure that we're looking at more of the social capital as opposed to just who has the experience.
Well, I think social capital comes into play in more so in finding the jobs. I think that's where networking is where social capital really becomes key in terms of, getting leads and, connections to people who can tell you where leads are and what you're able to find online. And, for example, people who might tune in, to this series, maybe they, understand some of the work that RTriad is doing, for example, and find a way into cybersecurity work, as an example. So I think social capital becomes important in that way. How broad is your network? And I think that's where it has a key role. But I really don't think the foundations of how you get a job will necessarily change, at least not immediately. I think it might be I don't want to say a slow change because it's already changing. We've already seen, how it's changing. But I thought LaShanya had a interesting comment about, like we're doing all of these virtual conversations, meetings, interviews now, and we want to make sure that we learn how to pick up on some of the social cues and cultural competency, and how we connect with people differently is changing very rapidly, has already changed.
And everyone has brought up really great points. And LaShanya mentioned something, emotional intelligence, and that made me draw back on a conversation I had with Jeff DeBellis, our Director of Commerce for North Carolina. And he mentioned one of the top kind of skills that you need is like employability, and that means people have to enjoy working with you and they can see themselves working with you. You're pleasant to be around, you're a team player. So in terms of employability, like you do want to keep that in mind. You do want to be emotionally intelligent. One of the things I typically do when I'm in an unfamiliar group setting, I introduce myself with my name and then my pronouns, to always be thinking about how to not single anyone out, but also be very inclusive in a digital environment. So for someone, that means the world to have that type of acknowledgement. So there's little practices that we can all participate in to make sure we're welcoming, culturally sensitive, inclusive, and showcase our character as well as our competency.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to go into our next question. So we're talking about social capital and the skills to kind of like, I'm not going to say navigate, but essentially to kind of like navigate that world of having a network, utilizing those resources. So what types of skills are integral and transferable to various industries that our viewers may not have considered to be competitive?
I think at the current moment right now, where we are valuing and being able to embody a value of equity, inclusivity, is really important at this moment. I'm currently involved in some major searches for leadership positions at the university, and I've seen a dramatic shift in even the way that we ask questions of candidates at all levels about their views on this and how they will embody this and become part of the fabric of how we embody this as a workforce and as an organization. So I think that for some people, it's naturally a part of who you are. And it ties back to that original answer about, cultural competence. But I think even now more so than the global mindset, which we heard so much about in recent years, we're thinking a lot about how do we value inclusivity, and thinking again about Sheena's example of even introducing your pronouns when you introduce yourself. So I think that's definitely one skill that's becoming more in demand, which I think is a welcome change.
Yeah, I'd say that something that's important for every job is just the ability to analyze, as you see in the market. Just words like strategist, analyst, creative, those things are really coming because mainly of the millennial generation, but in general, because a lot of companies are looking to maybe change ways of doing things. I think that you really hear a lot of that now in this new normal, but some people are thinking about what does normal look like again. So I think that your ability to come in and really understand information, so locate the data sources, locate the information that you need to understand, be able to analyze that, and then build on solutions, I think is really important in any job, in any sort of space you're.
One of the things that comes to mind for me is the ability and willingness to teach and share. And that's kind of up and down the line. It kind of points to one of the questions that I think, the areas I think we were going to talk about, but this is going to be one of those rare moments in time where you can have 5 different generations in the workplace at the same time. So it's, when we talk about inclusivity, it's not just around things like LGBTQI. It's also around ageism and the different generations that have different perspectives. Some would say that, work ethic is different, and having an understanding about that. But everyone, regardless of where you sit, having a willingness to share what you know, to teach what you know, but also to learn from others. Because, when you talk about, we can't exclude people because they are different and their mindsets are different. So I think that's one of the potentials for clashes that we see in the workplace, but it's something that we need to figure out how to resolve fairly quickly in terms of how we approach individuals and how inclusive we are, and just having a resolve to learn from others, share what you know, but learning from others as well, I think, is going to be critically important.
So going back to the topic of 5 generations being in the workplace, do you think that right now employers are ready for that? Me personally, I say no, just because the millennial generation, we're not with some of the formalities per se. I feel like in this time that we're currently in, we're seeing now that work as we know it is no longer what it's going to be. And so I feel as if though there's going to be a time when we're going to all come back to work whenever that time is, and how we work, it's just not going to be a thing anymore. And I feel as if though some employers may not be ready for that. So does anyone else have any thoughts on where we're headed in terms of 5 generations in the workforce? Millennials are kind of like, all right, so this isn't working. So how can we improve on these things, and like what things can stay and what things should go?
I do think one of the things that is very helpful for managing multiple generations in the workplace is the ability to kind of speak up and manage and set expectations early and often. Sometimes we all need that reminder. I am currently in a place where there are several generations, and you can see how people work together. And you really have to know at your core what works for you and share that with others as you work with them. So I do have those 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds fresh out of college who are just like, hey, yo, man, can you do da da da? And I'm like, wow. And that's how they start the email. Whereas I'm just like, hey, hope you're doing well. How is the family? Da 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 da. And then I ask, give you my request. And then I noticed that there is a real kind of set of boundaries for seasoned professionals. And they're just like, okay, we're not working after 7:00. I'll call you in the morning. Like, once they realize I'm in a different time zone, they're just like, you know what, Sheena, it's dinner time. I'll call you tomorrow. So I do think it is important for you to kind of, in terms of your internal compass, know what your boundaries are, share those out, and invite people to kind of navigate those as well, and share how they work best, because we are all different, and generations have different beliefs, and having that understanding is probably one of the best portrayals of leadership, because you're thinking critically, you're thinking like an actual leader on how to manage people and the intersectionality of people. So I do think, setting boundaries and balance, and then having people engage in that and kind of remind them often as needed about those things as well is very important.
I have to jump in and say that working at the university, and I'm sure that everybody who's had some experience at UNC will agree, we have been slow to adjust to the changing trends in the workplace. And, they say don't waste a crisis. I think this COVID moment has given us a wonderful opportunity to explore different ways of living and working together. And I do think that some of the things that historically people have been closed-minded to the possibilities of flexible work schedules and teleworking, even as a concept, has really been shaken up. And so it's, I think, a tremendous moment. I know there are units on campus, for example, who lease space currently, who are looking at terminating their leases and not ever returning to work in a physical workspace. And so I feel like this moment has sort of forced us to be more prepared, to be more contemporary. And then I really like what Patricia said about the opportunity for everybody to teach and learn. And I do think that this new space where we're more technology driven, where we're adjusting to different work styles that are more familiar to the younger generation, there's opportunity for reverse mentoring. And so where possible, we try to create those spaces and opportunities. But I do think that it's important as younger folks are coming into the workforce, that you're prepared to take on that mentorship role. And again, I think that ties back to some of what Sheena was talking about, when you have to know your work style and how it works with others who may have a different set of values or expectations for what work will be like. But I think we're at the precipice of a moment where a lot of industries that have historically have been unmovable are going to be more flexible and probably more accommodating to the younger workforce.
Yes, LaShanya, you read my mind, because I was going to say, with the state and just the public sector and higher education in general, we just traditionally have been much, much slower to move. So, if we're not ready, we're going to have to get ready, because candidates are, they're everywhere, and, just being able to continue to attract talent and making sure that, we're ready to take on the talent that's out there. We're going to have to continue to, go to out of state to recruit and things like that. And it's going to have to be virtual. So it's just, there's a lot of different things at play with, working in 5 different generations and making sure you have that inclusiveness and that diversity to be able to make sure that the universities and higher education and just in general are able to continue to keep up with the students that they have come in the door.
In Germany, I know that everyone spoke, and I completely agree with everyone's points. I would just say that something that my company is doing is actually bringing in trainings for the different generations. So you've been able to kind of learn about them from, I think, an objective third party, and then you get the actual practice of working with the people on your teams. So there are a few people from different generations on my teams, and then with the learning that we have, we're able to come together. So I think that knowing what those generations are and what is kind of different among each is really important too, and kind of goes to LaShanya's point about how that can also happen with reverse mentoring.
Right. But in that, I think that's an important point, Aaron. But in that, going back to what Sheena said, it really is about, you don't want to run the risk of pigeonholing people because they're of a certain generation. So, there's a caution there, so it really is about, having a broad understanding of, my generation. I am a baby boomer. Okay. I'm a baby boomer, but just given the variety of roles I've had over the course of my career, I've had to learn and grow and adjust and, figure it out and help other people, work with other people when there are clashes, generational or otherwise. So it really comes down to the individual and making sure that we are teaching people and learning how to have those conversations, because there is a hesitancy even to have the conversation about, here's my work style, here's how I work best. How do you work best? Some folks, it never occurs to them, to have that simple conversation with a coworker to figure out, here's how I can help you, can I call on you if I need help with X? So I think it's those kind of simple conversations that we all have to learn how to have, and just be careful not to pigeonhole. But there are clearly differences, Aaron, to your point, and help with that and understanding in a broad sense of what comes with each generation in terms of how we were raised. Were you raised as a baby boomer in a very formal way, and workplaces are far less formal these days. I can recall a conversation I had recently with a manager who was complaining that one of her staff basically sent her a text message saying, I won't be in today. And she's like, what is this text message stuff? I didn't get a phone call. And I said, well, you kind of got to get with the text messages. It was a communication. Well, I didn't hear from him. Yes, you did. So things as simple as that in terms of expectations and how they need to change.
I think it's been so tricky just in this situation, because the generation who is not as technology savvy, they've kind of been thrown into all of this into a technology space, and now they're just expected to learn it. So I think, Patricia, to your point, yes, we do have to start having those conversations and making sure everybody is on the same page, because I do think a lot of people are going to get left behind, if we don't start having that. And because, our workforce is changing, we have to make sure that, people are retiring later, or people are not retiring at all. So we still have these people in our workforce that we have to make sure that we accommodate for.
That's a great point. I guess to kind of play devil's advocate a little bit, do you think that because we do have multiple generations in the workforce, that we're going to fast, or is it a matter of if you're in the workforce, you have to keep up because it's the direction that we're going in? So I guess like what's the happy medium with that? Is it like Aaron mentioned, trainings for all the generations and figure out how to work with each other, or is it a matter of look, get in where you fit in. If you can't figure it out, maybe we find other options for you. So like what's the happy medium between those two? At what point does training end and the conversations end and we start really like working towards that? So I guess what do you guys think?
I think it varies from space to space, and you have to understand your organization's baseline for where they are relative to the national trends, right? So there are certain things that are going to be true no matter what industry you're working in, that are going to be certain skills you're expected to have, certain competencies, and those evolve over time. But as I shared, like coming from the university space in particular, our tendency has been a much slower pace relative to the rest of, industry or other areas where people might be working. And so even though we are making what seem like monumental changes, they're still a little bit behind the contemporary curve. And so I think that what's going to be important for professionals in the workplace is to kind of understand where their industry falls and, to find a place where they can be comfortable. Coming from an HR background, it is incumbent upon us to give employees opportunities to have the skills that they need to be successful. But we also understand that people are individual and have their own drives, motivations, and passions. And so, we do our best to try to match that up with what we offer to make them prepared to be successful. But sometimes it may mean making a change if you find that the particular industry that you're in is moving at a pace that you're not comfortable with.
And LaShanya, that's a really good point in terms of like the pace, because it does seem like it was really, really fast and kind of thrown at people. And looking at the generations now, I think as soon as we have an understanding broadly about the generations in the workplace, you start seeing who believes in like the values, who believes in like work from home and being autonomous. And it does kind of fall on those immediate managers and supervisors to really manage people and help them and equip them with the tools they need. So instead of just saying, they didn't ask for help, now it kind of falls upon like those immediate supervisors to kind of see if there's a need or if there's a disconnect, how to initiate the conversation so that those people can speak up for what they need. And I know for some generations that's almost unheard of. You just kind of do your job, punch in, punch out. But being able to give people a voice is kind of falling on the immediate leadership team, where you're kind of say, all right, if you don't know what to say, ABCs, always be curious. If you don't, instead of saying, I don't know, just say, hey, I'm curious to know more about this mail merge you speak of. So like giving them the language and kind of the tools so they're comfortable and they feel empowered to speak up about what they need to be successful in all of the change and transitions that's going on.
We want to take this time to bring your attention to our online community that we hold every week. Please join our Know One community as we explore various topics from careers, DevOps, and cybersecurity with professionals and experts that are currently in the field and have made their mark within the field and to help you start your career. Thank you for your time, and let's get back to the conversation.
So in the first episode that we started the Future of Work series with, it was about the gig economy, and essentially the gig economy is people are leaving their corporate jobs, their 9-to-5 jobs, essentially like a more structured work setting. They're now starting to work for themselves. And so in this time period that we're in now, some people may decide, you know what, life is too uncertain right now. I may need a corporate job, and working for myself may no longer be the most financially stable thing for me. So I'm going to have a corporate job or a job in a more, I don't want to say professional, but in a more structured setting. And then we may see some people who are in corporate, they're saying, yeah, this isn't working for me, so I'm going to work for myself. So with whatever the future may hold, how can vendors, small businesses, and businesses in general be competitive for what the future may hold, regardless of whatever direction people go in? How can they still remain competitive in the current direction that we're going in?
Well, I think one of the early lessons, and something that I repeat over and over again, just from an HR perspective, gone are the days where people sign, even if you're hiring somebody or somebody takes a job with you. This is not, I tell people, why are you asking, where do you want to be in 5 years or 10 years? Yeah, no, it's not that kind of world anymore. So at best, hopefully you can get somebody on board and, keep them engaged, keep them motivated, keep them learning, for a year, 2 if you're lucky. And then folks who have opportunities to move around within your company, maybe you keep them a little bit longer than that. But, so it's no more the, commitment that folks have been used to in our prior history around work. Folks aren't signing up for the long haul.
I think that I guess I'll answer this more from a mindset of someone, an individual, or who's leaving the gig to come into an organization. I would say that there's a huge value on creativity and entrepreneurial mindset. Because oftentimes we're asked to create something out of little or to be innovative and think of novel ways to do things. And so I do think that individuals looking to make that shift from the gig space or the consulting space into an organization can definitely leverage those skills and highlight those, because I think that there's a space for it there. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd say like 2 things. So one is just take advantage of all of the free course offerings that I've been seeing, and all the ways that you can maybe boost your education that won't cost you, because you can always make money from that education. And then I'd say how to help small businesses in this time being competitive is someone else already touched on sort of innovation, and that always, thinking about how I can put maybe 10 years into perspective. But I'd say beyond that is really like knowing your customer and knowing your market. Like if you think about a big company like Microsoft, we have so many products that we operate for and so many customers. But if I was maybe wanting to look into one space and say maybe make a niche technology, like a certain game or a certain app that would maybe help, that would help me know my customer, as opposed to trying to scale large for all these customers, that would then bring in a lot of competition. So I'd say always like know your customer and design what you're doing for that customer. Whereas larger companies typically tend to have a larger scale. And then that's just a tip on I think for businesses. But yeah, always, especially if you're looking to make those switches. I know tech companies in general are sometimes, and we can maybe get into this a bit later, but in general are looking to make their policies more welcoming to different types of education. And so understand all the ways that you can learn in this time and try to apply that if you're looking to make a switch.
Aaron, you touched on, I guess it kind of goes back to our conversation about social capital, knowing your customers, essentially talking to people, getting to know what niches are there or what people can get into essentially like in their business or whatever. So of course, social capital is not just important for individuals, but for businesses as well. So how has this teleworking experience or remote work transform those business to business relationships in terms of like social capital? I don't know if that makes sense, but I can rephrase if needed.
Well, I know for the transformation that we've had where we were working in the office and now we're working from home, just in our backgrounds, like they're starting to see that, okay, Sheena isn't just like my Cisco rep, but Sheena also has a 5-year-old in the background as they have a 6-month-old in a pack and play. So like we are now building relationships and like kind of letting people see who we are and the many caps that we wear. And, you hear all of the PR about we're in this together, but being able to kind of see someone's lived experience a little bit or kind of get a glimpse in, you really feel like, okay, they get me. So if they hear a toddler screaming, don't stress out because their child is also probably going to cry in a few minutes, but you learn to be understanding, you learn to be accommodating. And I don't think that would have happened if we were able to just work in the workplace where it was kind of, all right, you keep personal, professional, but now we're starting to see how much really blends in. And that has really helped build relationships between me and my partners, me and my customers. And like Erin mentioned, knowing your audience, instead of saying, hey, I'm Sheena, I'm your sales rep, it's kind of like, hey, Sheena, and I let them know I came from higher ed. I understand the importance of assessment, evaluation, programs, and the minimal budget. I get it. So, when they realize I'm not just trying to like push all of this high price stuff on them, but, I understand the protocols, I understand things that need to happen. We can engage in a dialogue, and it's not so much a sales pitch, but it's really and truly a conversation.
I think what's been really cool during this time is that right now, since regular business has kind of changed or shifted a little bit, just in terms of things might be slowing down for some departments or, just regular business operations, we've actually taken this time to figure out how we can strengthen organizational partnerships. So outreach in our community and just making sure that we're touching on, different organizations who are doing really awesome things. And believe it or not, sometimes those organizations have slowed down a little bit. So they're also looking to partner. So just those kind of business to business interactions in those ways, and making sure we're having those organizational partnerships, especially for HR and recruitment, to make sure that we strengthen that talent pipeline. It's been really, really crucial for us.
All right. So, Raven, you work for the university. Can you repeat your title for me one more time?
Sure. Yeah, I'm the lead staffing specialist for UTS at UNC Chapel Hill.
Gotcha. Okay. So you mentioned that you're seeing a notice or potentially seeing the need for the job recruiting process to become more innovative and to branch out from the person-to-person or face-to-face meetings, the multiple rounds of interviews, the resumes, the cover letters, all of that good stuff. So in your role and what you do, how do you see that changing in the near future, or not even really a timeline, but paper is no longer the norm. So we're no longer going to be turning stuff in paper wise. It might just be electronic. My flash drive may have my portfolio on it, or I may have created a website. So how do you see that changing, and do you see that becoming a thing where employers are saying your interview is now through Zoom or it's through Microsoft Teams? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, to all of that. Honestly, all of our interviews right now are Zoom. So I do, on average, maybe 1 or 2 interviews a day, just with different candidates in our kind of candidate pool. But everything is through Zoom, because nobody wants to put themselves in that type of position where they're, gonna cause harm to somebody else or to ourselves, right? So even after we go back to campus, I think honestly it's going to be a lot more Zoom interviews while people are still a little bit more apprehensive right now. As far as resumes and everything, for the state, you do have to apply online. So you can have a paper resume at a job fair or something like that, and that's all well and good, but you still have to apply online. So just with our ATS and our tracking system. So a lot of things are going much more towards the digital space now. And again, it's a lot more rapid at this point just because of COVID. So it's definitely changing in the recruitment space in those regards.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, I've been interviewing people, via Zoom, but one of the things that I think is important, regardless of how technology is assisting in these processes, whether it's applying for jobs online, Zoom interviews, I don't want anybody to forget that you're still representing yourself, whether it's in the online application or in the Zoom meeting, because a first impression is really difficult to undo. So this goes back to a little bit of the generational divide conversation, because I'm noticing that, folks who are like, hey, I'm interested in your job, can you call me at 10 o'clock tomorrow? Okay. And, they didn't give you a phone number, they gave you an email address. Okay. I can email you, but I can't call you. But, and then the resume is 5 pages long. Yeah, no. So there are still some things that are appropriate, and there's no other way to put it, and things that are inappropriate. So even, as we make these shifts to, the Zoom interviews, the Zoom meetings, and really connecting with people, more electronically that way, and, how you present yourself in an online application or a resume that you upload somewhere, it's still important that you don't forget that you're representing yourself. And if you want a second look, you have to be worthy of the second look. So I think that that's kind of important. No matter how work changes, you still have to, show me a product that I want to buy.
Sure. I'll let you go.
Okay. I just want to piggyback off of what Patricia was saying, because it was right along the thoughts that I was having about the fact that regardless of how electronic we go, you're still communicating, and communication is important. Written communication is important. So your ability to clearly articulate, complete thoughts, and not have misspellings and use appropriate grammar are all still very important things. And I have noticed a shift in the way people even present themselves in resumes, and that's fine, but you also don't want to be distracting. So I think people can sometimes go too far on the spectrum of trying to stand out to the point that you become so distracting that the skills that you have listed or whatever gets missed because people are spending so much time focused on, the huge picture you put in the upper left-hand corner, and, trying to figure out, do I read this from left to right or top to bottom? You've got different quadrants here, lots of different columns and things going on in one space. So I do think it's important to be careful, because you do want to stand out, you do want to make a statement, but you also need to understand effective communication and how to organize information in a way that people can understand what it is you're trying to sell.
Yeah, and some things never change. If I have 5 that are easy to read, easy to get through, and your one's gone on the pile over here, and that's just something that's just never going to change.
Right. I completely agree. I think even for our company, we still say that a 1-page black and white resume does the job. People will come in, because these are software engineers, so they're trying to really be decorative, which is great. But I mean, you can kind of stick to the one, the way that I think it has always worked, on a 1-page resume. But I just want to take a second to talk about what I really do believe that technology is helping us do, and what I think some challenges may be. So I think that we are taking all of our recruiting virtual for the year, which is great. But I think that there's sort of a challenge with that. I think that some of our career centers really depend on that funding. And so as we think about how we go forward, if it's virtual, I think that recruiters really have to partner more with the university relations teams within their recruiting divisions, and understand, all right, what are the ways that because if we were paying Stanford $5,000 a semester to recruit there, that is really helping their career center. And if we are no longer, where are they getting that from? So how do we maybe still host things with the Career Center? How do we maybe still use the Career Center virtually? But there still needs to be a relationship. And when we talk about social capital, that's a stakeholder. And then I want us to think about the threats with diversity. Oftentimes, meeting a student is the way that you're able to see that they are diverse. Of course, you have other tracking systems, but sometimes students don't self-identify. Sometimes students may put other. Sometimes students may only be allowed to put in one race. And sometimes students are white passing, or in some cases maybe multiracial. And so I want us to just continue to think about that as we move forward. Something that I think technology is helping with is facial recognition. And so, looking at things like LinkedIn, which, I mean, facial recognition is a fancy way of saying it, but you can just look and see. But how do we make sure that way that we were able to meet the student before? I know that we're really big on hiring diverse candidates. And that is something that we're thinking through. But all in all, I think that technology, so I definitely just kind of maybe said two bad things, but I think that it's really helping us. It's providing platforms like LinkedIn, which then has a recruiter option, which a lot of recruiters use there. So you have everyone on LinkedIn that you're able to source from. But I really want us to think about career centers and that needed funding, especially on a academic level, because they aren't private. And then how you can sort of just do that checking and making sure candidates are diverse, or in some cases, kind of doing more than checking boxes, if that makes sense.
I agree. I think it's going to take a lot of innovation on all parts. For example, my interview at UNC was very much so paper resume. I apply online. I have a phone interview. I come in. I have an in-person interview. My interview is 3 hours. And then I have also applied other places where the interview was very informal. I didn't even have to apply online. I just sent in a resume and I got a phone call, and then I have another phone call, and then I submit a video of myself talking about why I want this position, what questions can I answer, why this company. And for me, it created a very different mindset of, whoa, like this isn't it. For me, it kind of like sold me more, if that makes sense, because it was just very different. I had never experienced anything like that before. And I think for us younger generations, I think a lot of other companies can follow that lead. And I think you would see like a mutually beneficial relationship of saying, like, this is something new that we're doing, or something different, how we can attract a newer crowd. So, and I think too, coming from a space of like the higher education, like being in higher ed, some things just aren't going to be able to happen. I definitely think I haven't been in a space now currently where, interviews are through Zoom. But also too, I think kind of like what Aaron is saying, like really paying attention to diversity and kind of like using different ways to making sure that you're still living up to the mission and values of your organization during this time. So what do you guys think about kind of going back to the question of what can be done, or like what avenues should businesses take to essentially kind of keep up with the trend that we're going in, and how this whole interview process is going to be overturned at some point and be something completely different?
I know Germany from my personal experience making that transition from the career center to the corporate side. I shared with students about my experience and how important it is to ask questions about what to expect. When you're talking to the recruiter, get insight on the process, because sometimes people have never heard themselves talk. They've never recorded themselves. Being digital is kind of new and quite frankly scary, and it kind of falls on the career center staff to start preparing, have those services once again that can help students prepare, or professionals who are transitioning to a different industry prepare and get comfortable. And so sharing that, I kind of shared it with my team. I'm like, hey, we should start preparing students and our graduates for non-traditional type interviews, group interviews, virtual interviews, where they have to now acknowledge that there is someone else, not as their competition, but they made a great point, showcase their character, and by saying, you know what, John, you made a really great point, and I agree with that. And so the recruitment process is kind of changing, where they're looking at everything from a holistic, not just all right, are you a great communications? Check. Are you great at leadership? Check. But it's like, how do they engage with each other? Sometimes they'll even, have you be around people you might think is your competition, but when it's really just you being your competition, and they want to see, all right, how do they engage with these people? What are they going to do? They watch how you move. And so I do think it is important to understand what the process is like. Your recruiter for those really good organizations, they're there to help you win. You know, if you got a shot, they're there to build you up and tell you what you could do differently, what you could do a little bit better, how to prep you, and get you to the next step. And so for those organizations, they are really big on brand, and like you get the brand, this person really wants to see me win. Even if I didn't make it through the whole round, I felt like they wanted to see me win, and that felt good. And I'm going to tell my colleague or my friend, consider applying there because they want people to win. So I do think, one, if you're on the job search, know what to expect, prepare yourself for it. And you have to practice. You do have to practice whatever if it's questions, if it's recording yourself and doing a video submission, know what it is, prepare for it, and give it your best. And for those companies who are real big on their brand, if they want you to win, they're going to make sure their recruiters are helping you, trying to get you to the next step. And you're going to feel that, and you're going to share that. And so it becomes a snowball effect where they don't, they're building a pipeline just off of their reputation, even though the candidate might not have made it forward. It's like, this was a great experience. Sharing that with Career Center, so now they can start thinking, oh, we're just going to tell me about your strengths, tell me about your weaknesses. But now they can start positioning students and transitioning professionals for that type of, environment.
Yeah, and I want to touch on Sheena, what you were just saying, and then going back to Aaron, just with the career centers and everything. That's been huge for, I know, a lot of businesses, especially just with UTS partnering with career centers to make sure, because it does a couple of things. One, it allows the business to be able to meet candidates and to, whether they're doing mock interviews, whether they're engaging with their career fairs virtually. There have been a lot of really, really good virtual career fairs that do have those group interview kind of settings, or those individual interviews. It kind of gives you a little tidbit of what it might look like. So it's been a really awesome way to meet some of those stellar candidates. And then, of course, on the candidate side, it gives you that preparedness to be able to really shine in some of those virtual interviews with an employer. So career centers have been a great way for businesses to make those connections as well as candidates.
Please be sure to visit our website, rtriad.com/no1, to join in on our weekly calls and conversations regarding technical careers, DevOps, and cybersecurity. We would love to have you join in, and we would love to have you participate with the experts and professionals that we bring in the discussion every week. See you there.
All great points. I can definitely say for myself, I had already had a job when I applied for this other place, but it definitely got me thinking about, okay, I had to go through all of this, and I learned a lot from it, but it also let me know the importance of still remaining competitive and showing yourself in a competitive light. The interview process was like it was like a group interview, and just talking to people where you're just like, oh, wow, they're doing this, they're doing that. So it made me realize, okay, so on paper, from the beginning point of me applying for this position, how can I paint myself as a competitive individual? Because not all of us will have the opportunity to have a way to submit a video as part of our interview. A lot of people only have the opportunity to fill out an application online, and then the first time they're seeing you is they're seeing, you in person for your in-person interview. So what ways can people determine if they're qualified and competitive for a position?
I think it's important to pay attention to what skills you have, so to be self-aware about what it is that you're bringing to bear. And I'm a firm believer that you don't have to have just one resume. And I think it really makes a difference when I'm reviewing resumes and I can tell that someone took care to read the job announcement and to really draw parallels between their skill set and what we're looking for. So helping us find the unobvious. So maybe you've got some skills that you believe translate into what we're asking for, but on the surface, looking at your exact job duties might not highlight that. So find a way to communicate that either through your cover letter or through the way you describe your experience, I think can really be key, because as I said, even folks coming from the gig space into industry, you've had to be creative, you've had to be flexible, adaptable, innovative. And so being able to translate that into spaces where the person who's reading your resume might not obviously see that. So helping us to understand why it is that you feel like you belong is really important. And I think it's a little bit of extra work, but I think it does cause a standout when you help us, right? Because if you've got 60 or so resumes to look through, sometimes you don't know where your resume is going to fall in that stack. And so the attention span at that point might be a little bit lower by the time they get to your application. And so anything that you can do to highlight and emphasize particular skills, so think creatively and draw the conclusions for the employer, I think is helpful.
And to that, I might just add, write it plain as day. So write it so that a 5-year-old can interpret it. You often get these, and I think that's even an interview question that we ask, is explain this to a 5-year-old, and that can be, pretty difficult. It's in any space. So that, and also just getting your resume, I think, into the right hands helps you stand out a lot. That takes a lot of maybe networking, maybe trying to cold email people. I know when I was looking for my job, I didn't know nobody at the company, so I was low-key cold emailing people on LinkedIn. And when I would do that, I would have, hey, this is my resume, but here's maybe 3 bullet points that I really want you to take away. And that goes into her point. This is really the work I've been able to do, but if you could only know 3 things about me, I want you to know these.
It's actually one of my favorite interview questions. What do you most want me to know about you? And that's really what should come through on a cover letter or a resume. And LaShawn, I mean, you hit it right on the head. Tailor that response, whether it's a resume, cover letter, or a combination, to the job posting. Because if I can't see it, and I mean, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, 5 to 10 seconds of scanning your resume, because I ain't reading it. It's going, she don't laugh at me, I'm just telling the truth. You're going in that other pile. So, you want to stand out, but you want to stand out in a way that, is quick and to the point that a 5-year-old can understand.
Right. I think sorry, Sheena.
Sorry.
I was just going to say that I think people want to know you want that job, not just a job.
And for me, I think it's the follow-up. If you apply to a position and, it's been weeks and months, however long, and you don't hear any feedback or anything from a recruiter or a hiring manager or anybody, that follow-up email to see, hey, I applied to this position and I'm just curious, what can I do better next time, or why, wasn't my information, just anything that any feedback that you can get from a recruiter or an organization, it's good feedback. So asking those questions, and again, that goes into networking and things like that. If you have a good recruiter and somebody who's on your side, and they might say, hey, you might not have been qualified for this job, but we have another opening, that might be later down the line that you might be a good fit for. So that follow-up email, that's actually what got me in the door, because I was not all the way qualified for what I did apply to, but I asked the question and I just said, hey, what can I do to better my resume or to make sure that I stand out? So, definitely asking those questions and making sure that you follow up in a professional way. Don't bombard a recruiter with emails. Please don't do that, but in a professional way.
And speaking of social capital, I've built a lot of mentorship relationships through that. So where individuals may have asked that same sort of question, Raven, and it turned into a series of conversations and then a mentor relationship. So I think that there is some value in that. Definitely, whether it leads to an immediate gain or not, I think it's important to build those relationships and to have your self-aware, reflective, willing to learn, all those things.
And another thing I would highlight would be your value. You know, you can talk about the things that you've done and how you're a good fit for a job, and be very intentional about what you're sharing, but also presenting with them the value that you can add to the organization. Sometimes that isn't always clear by saying, all right, here's the bullet point. I developed and implemented this, da, 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 da. But like, you really want to connect it fully so they can see your value. And yes, asking for feedback, you know, they're looking to learn a lot about your character. And so for someone who can say, hey, is there something I could do better or differently? That's somebody I would actually want on my team. But also knowing your true value, even sharing your network, and just say, hey, if you have other things, I'm happy to share it within my network. I had someone reached out, a consulting firm reached out and was like, hey, Sheena, we think you'd be a good fit for da da da, and XYZ referred you. And I told them, I was like, well, you know what, I'm not really looking right now, but I do think I can share it with XYZ, who would be a great fit because they've done blah, blah, blah. And so now that firm is just like, hey, are you open now? So like you want to make sure that you build those relationships like through mentorship or just who you are, and like being a good human, willing to help, you know, someone find the good job. So, you know, there's several ways in which you can showcase character, but I do think, you know, showing your value and your character is always helpful.
Yeah, absolutely, Sheena. And that goes not just with getting the job, but once you're on the job. You know, I often tell, you know, folks that I'm mentoring, or, you know, if I'm doing training or what have you, I am proud to say that in my 30 plus years of working, I have interviewed for a job twice. And it's not that I've had so many jobs, but you want to be the person that somebody's going to take with them when they go, or call you when they have an opportunity, or they're going to think about you. So you want to be that person, and that shows up in your character and how you show up, whether it's on the interview. So maybe you don't get that job, but somebody's going to remember you and say, you know, even recommend you to other people. You know, my position was filled, but I interviewed this woman here. Let me connect you. So you want to be that person, and that shows up through your character, through the follow-up that Raven was suggesting, in so many ways. You want to be the person, you know, who folks want, and they reach out for you, and they bring you with them. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Raven mentioned that when the job that you have, that you weren't necessarily qualified for the position. My question is, do qualifications truly matter? I'm not talking about like the baseline qualifications, whether it's like if you're applying to be a doctor and you don't have a medical degree, not stuff like that. But in terms of, let's say, years of experience, does that actually matter? Do you think that we're heading into a space of years of experience equals or does not equal to skill level? Is that a place that you guys think that we are venturing into, or do qualifications matter? Like, is it an and or? Is it both? What do you think it is?
I'll jump in real quick and just say, from a legal perspective, yeah, they matter. From the state perspective, yes, they matter. You do have to meet the minimum qualifications for a posting in order to, you know, be considered. However, I would just like to say to our women, don't, you know, be discouraged by those preferred qualifications. I think that's what, you know, gets a lot of people who, especially women, just statistically, women do not apply to the positions that they don't feel qualified for, you know, looking at that compared to men. So just, you know, don't get discouraged by it. Again, if you have somebody who's on your team, on your side, you know, they may look at your resume and say, hey, you might not be a good fit for this position, but here's something else. So I just want to throw that out there before we start.
I will agree with Raven. You know, there are certain legal requirements for different employer types where you have to meet the minimums. I do think it goes back to what I keep saying about be creative about your experiences and the skills that you have. So maybe it's not an exact fit, but you can draw some equivalency. And so obviously you've looked at it and thought it was something desirable and reasonable for you to do. So just being able to articulate that in a way that makes it easier for employers to justify the hiring decision, I think is a good thing. And then also, I think one of the things I know I've struggled with as a hiring supervisor sometimes is when I have extended that leniency to somebody where maybe I've stretched a little bit or I was creative because there was something about their character or their potential, is in that negotiation stage is where it breaks down because, maybe I'm ready to offer the job, but the person wants to make what I would pay someone who exactly met the skills and experience that I was expecting. And so I think that you don't want to undervalue yourself, but there is a level of humility. So if you are stretching or being stretched to kind of reach into a role that's going to be tremendous amount of growth for you, and maybe you're coming in under what exactly was advertised as the expectation, to really take that into consideration and to be a little bit reasonable, because I think that it can pay off in the long run if you're willing to do that. And again, I know it's a delicate balance with not undervaluing yourself, but I think just some level of realism.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I would say you have to be willing, in terms of your own growth and development, to sometimes go sideways to get a particular piece of experience you need in order to go up. And that's something that folks don't always think about. They're always thinking about an upward trajectory, but not necessarily understanding that sometimes you need that one thing that might be pivotal for you to get the job that you want, and you might have to go sideways, i.e. take a lateral position. Sometimes you have to leave the company you're with to come back to the company for that promotion. So there's different ways to look at how to get where you want to go. It's not always a straightforward trajectory.
I also think there needs to be a willingness to get whatever it is that you're lacking. So once you're in the door, not to rest on your laurels that you secured this position, but if you're being honest about where you are in your experience level or your knowledge level, being willing to pursue opportunities for professional development, whether that's made available through your employer or not. I think it's a service to yourself, to your profession, to your long-term career goals, to be willing to go out and develop in areas where you might be deficient. It's so that when you're coming up for that next opportunity that is going to be the next big step, that you don't feel underqualified, or you don't have to worry so much about whether or not your qualifications and experience will meet the mark.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that lateral moves matter a lot, just like upward moves. But I do think that one thing that could be helpful with job postings is oftentimes job postings will have a number when it's attached to an amount of years that you need to spend in this one area, or 10 plus years of consulting experiences. So I think that what more companies have been really looking to do is kind of understand what those numbers really mean. What does it mean to have 10 years of consulting experience? If you maybe got that same experience, but you weren't in a consulting role. If you got those same skills, but it maybe didn't take you 10 years, it maybe took you 8, or it took you, a little longer. Let's really try to maybe or qualify what that 10 years means and try to put that in a job description also.
Yeah, I agree. And I was going to, piggybacking off of what Aaron was saying, back to Germany's original question, I think it's quality of experience, not quantity of experience necessarily, unless you're in a regulatory environment where like state governments that have those rules and they're hard fast and they haven't adjusted yet. But it's really quality of experience, because I'd much rather have somebody who's had a year experience and they're running circles around the folks who they're working with who've had 10 years of experience. Give me the person with the 1 year of experience who's a fast study, a quick learner, invests in their own growth and development, and not always, well, I'm not going to do it if the company's not going to pay for it. Sometimes you need to go there yourself, in order to be able to compete. So quality of where a regulatory requirement is not getting in the way. I look for quality of experience over years of experience or quantity.
Patricia, if only other employers were like you.
Well, I do my best, among my colleagues. So I'm frequently like the odd man out, but it just makes sense. It makes sense, and I'm happy to say that people don't want to leave me.
I've seen so many jobs where the qualification is 5 years of experience for an entry-level job, and they're doing entry-level pay, and it's just like, truth be told, that's cute on paper, but that's not cute in real life. And it definitely has discouraged me from applying to some jobs just because I have those qualifications, but I don't have the years of experience. And I think it goes back to what Raven is saying, especially as a woman, regardless of if you feel as if though you're qualified or not, still do it. Especially to just learn. I've taken some negotiating classes, and women are statistically less likely to negotiate their salaries. They're just going to take what's been given to them, whereas men, 75% of the time, they're going to go for it and ask. It may not be some outlandish number, but it's going to be a reach as to what they're qualified for what the company can actually give. And so I think that just getting into a space where I'm kind of reaching that point of, all right, so I'm hitting my 2-year mark, what's next? And really being confident in saying, all right, I may not be qualified for this, but I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to use my social capital and say, hey, we work together. What insight can you give me? Who do you know? I found that that's sometimes just as important as what I have on paper. Yeah.
That's like the next episode is the future of pay and pay competitiveness and benefits and everything else. That's a whole other topic for sure.
It is.
But one last thing I would say for employers where there is a flexibility, and I know my situation is, is different, at least in, for my day job, because, I have the authority and the flexibility, but what comes to mind is 2 times that I was, I insist on interviewing anybody who comes into our company for a management position. And recently was interviewing a woman for a management position, and she was just more than the position that she had applied for and that I was interviewing her for. But I saw that just based on who she was and what I believe she could bring to the party, that she would fill a gap that I had in a position that I hadn't even created yet. So again, I know my situation is sometimes different, but I created a position, because I needed a woman to fill a gap that I identified from an interview. She was interviewing for something else. And I'm fortunate in having been in a role where I've been able to do that, not once, not twice, maybe 10 times, because it's about talent. And particularly when you're in a tight labor market, sometimes you can't afford to let that person go. And you need to figure out, how do I get that person, because they're what I need. I had one of those interviews last Friday.
Yeah, I think in a similar situation, once you're in those roles and you feel like you have gotten all you can get from your current position and you're ready to do something different or branch out in a different direction, I think what you've done with your time matters. So like Patricia was saying, the job I'm in didn't exist before I was in it. I was actually willing to leave the university to get some project management experience, and I also wanted to break into the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And I shared this with my manager, and I started my job search. And before I could even get my resume updated, they had created a role. for me to move into. And so I think that it's important to show up. I think that there's still some value in not just what you can get from the job, but what you can give to the job and to the employer. And there's still space where that can be recognized and acknowledged as well.
LaShanya, that's a really good point. And I wanted to definitely kind of echo those sentiments and being comfortable having that conversation with your supervisor, and not asking their permission to explore other opportunities, but really getting their insight, helping you reflect on things that you've done naturally well so that you can kind of really identify those talents and strengths, and how those are perceived by other people as well can be very helpful, because there is like an interview question: what would others say about you as it relates to this? And sometimes people stutter and stumble through that question because they've never asked. So I do think, one, in terms of building that relationship with your supervisor, I know, be it good or bad, but it's really nice to get their insight because they supervise you and they can share information. And then that's a subtle way of letting them know, if you value me, know that I'm about to look for other options because I want to know more about this. And they can either be a catalyst to help you get there, or they can give you a blessing to get you there. In a different type of role. But I do think it is important to understand that the job search isn't just about getting another opportunity, but like really listen to what companies are saying. So if they're willing to hire someone outside the organization and you're right there, just take it for what it is and just say, you know what, they're not really interested in investing in internal people or me right now. So, that's okay to explore something outside of the organization. I do think sometimes that's the message that gets missed. It's okay to not be a fit. It's okay to not stay in a particular organization. It is okay to stay, and it is okay to be a fit. I do think it's always like, oh, well, you weren't a good fit for this, so, find something else. But like, it is okay that you get the right no so that you can get to the right yes.
And along the lines of what Sheena was saying, I think it's just important for everyone to think about what experiences that they want. So your career should not be this like challenging thing. If you're in a job that you kind of aren't liking, you can get out of it. Maybe that's just my opinion, but I believe that your career truly should be centered around what you want. Everything in life should. Go for the experiences that you want to have. You can create value along the way. You'll be able to give. No to, obviously, with that, have a lot of humility. Know when something is just realistically not what you're going to get. But know, like, okay, and what I mean by experience that I want, be open. So if you're like, oh, in my current role, I'm not getting experience with data. I want an experience that's quantitative. Be open to everything that could be quantitative that could come your way. Because like for me, whenever I said that to my manager, it maybe wasn't what I was looking for, but it gave me some quantitative experience. And so maybe it wasn't what I would have gone after, but it was what I got the experience that I needed. So keep thinking about it that way. Don't be so like specific, because I feel like that's how you kind of let yourself down. But you got a long career. Think about the experiences, the skills you want to have, and go for them in any way you can.
Aaron, I love what you just said, and it makes me think about, not being afraid of the no. So a lot of times we don't stretch because we're afraid of the rejection, but don't be afraid of that either, right? So that experience of getting the no or having the interview might be educational for you in some way. You may, on paper, look at a job and think it's absolutely what you want, but an interview is a two-way street, and you could learn through that process that actually this is not what I thought I wanted, and that's okay too.
That was great. All great comments. This is a really great discussion. Does anyone have any last words or takeaways that you'd like to give our viewers who may be, looking for a job, thinking about coming from corporate work and working for themselves, or going to a corporate job? You have any thoughts or words of advice?
I just really like the, get the right no so you can get to the right yes. That's a golden nugget that I will take away from this conversation, because we are far too often are we scared of rejection, and I just really appreciate that comment, because that's something that too many people don't hear. So that was a good one.
And I'll just reiterate that one of my favorite nuggets that Aaron shared is, if you don't like where you are, move. You are not a tree. And so it's okay if that move is sideways or down or up. It's okay. Just be open.
And what's the saying? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So you might as well just keep shooting until you can figure out. It's going to have to land at some point. This is a really great discussion. I enjoyed it. Thank you guys so much for being on the panel for Series 3, The Future of Work. And yep, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to learn more or get involved into the conversation, please visit our website at rtriad.com/no1 to join our community and network with not only other professionals within your careers, but also the experts who can then uplift you to achieving the goals you wish to obtain. Thank you for your time, and we hope to see you soon.